Hi everyone, welcome to Cafe Labellis, where I, Kristen, talk about books in the most comfortable way I know possible. Today we'll be talking about The Gunslinger by Stephen King. It was originally published in 1982 by Scribner, and it's the first book in the Dark Tower series by Stephen King. In this book, a cowboy hunts a man in black across the desolate deserts of some world that is similar to ours in some way, but different in others. And along the way, he meets a boy named Jake, and together they go search for the man in black and also for the Dark Tower. Now, I had only read 2 Stephen King books before this one. One of them is Under the Dome, and the other one is The Shining. I had heard of the Dark Tower series, and I'd always meant to pick it up. And so a friend lent this book to me, and I read it for the first time. I will say this, I was not impressed. But after I watched a video by Daniel Green, he's another YouTuber who covers a lot of fantasy books primarily. In his video, What to Know Before Reading The Dark Tower, he goes through a lot of explanations about what the Dark Tower is about, Stephen King's writing style, things like that. And even though I didn't enjoy The Gunslinger, I am going to continue with the series. And will likely put out book reviews as I go through those books as well, if I get through the whole thing. So with that in mind, my first impressions of the book were primarily hopeful. I'm always open to fantasy, especially darker fantasy, and books that take on a different aspect of the genre is always a very welcoming change. Having it put in a Western context and in a kind of desert scene, that's something a lot of fantasy doesn't do. The only time I've really seen desert explored in fantasy is in the Wheel of Time series. I haven't read Game of Thrones, but I know that that's explored as well in Dorne. So I was looking forward to reading this. But as I sat down to read, I actually found it kind of boring. The book's only about 250 pages, and yet it felt difficult sometimes to get through it. The start was fun because you go through this romp in a flashback of the gunslinger, whose name is Roland. There's a flashback to when he's visiting this town called Tull, and it's a very fast-paced event, really good setup, classic Stephen King from what I've read of him. And so I thought that was a really good start. But as the book went on, it just became really plodding and slow. Roland is not an interesting character. He's really just kind of a melancholy sad sack who's been hardened by his circumstances. And I think you can do those kinds of characters pretty well sometimes. But I don't think King did a good job with Roland in this case. There's nothing really to attach us to Roland except his mysterious background. And even then it kind of gets explained, and you can kind of tell from the hints dropped that he's from this utopia sort of society that collapsed for some reason, and the man in black is the one to blame. Or at least he sees the man in black as the one to blame. And then when Jake gets introduced, he's just kind of like, oh my gosh, it's someone from our world. How are they going to interact? What's going to be different? What's going to be the same? But then Jake just opts to forget everything that came before Roland found him. And so anything that comes up from our world, it's explained away. It's just oh, I don't remember where that came from. And it gets brushed past. So that was disappointing for me. Not only that, the universe of the Dark Tower is not really fleshed out. Personally, I'm more of a hard magic system sort of person. I like rules, I like logic. I enjoy being able to know how the rules of the world work so that I can try and predict things, I can try and think of my own solutions, compare them to the characters' solutions, things like that. But in this one, it seems like a soft magic system, but it also doesn't seem like a magic system, period. It's like King tries to have a soft magic system, but the mysticism is missing. And for me, a soft magic system only works if there's mystery and some kind of almost divinity that's part of it. So you don't really have to know the rules for the magic system in the world, but you can kind of sense how it can be used in the world. If you don't understand how something works, you can see how a character might use that as a tool. I didn't really get that sense here. There's one point where a jawbone is used to ward off certain kinds of magic, and it's used multiple times, and then for some reason it's just dropped. And it's never explained why they stopped using it. It's never really hinted at what its power is or what it's used for. And so because of that, I was just left wondering, like, what the heck was this jawbone for? Like, the way it turns up, too, is just completely random. And so I was just really disappointed with the world building, and also with the fact that I just could not get pulled into the universe and the magic system and the characters. So all of that led to a very dull read. It doesn't help that for most of the book, Roland and Jake are just walking. There's walking and flashbacks, and that's it. And you can only explain desert so many times. King tries, I will give him that. He tries to describe the desert in different ways, multiple times, but it just kind of feels like he's pulling words from a thesaurus, using words that are too grandiose for the context. And I think I said this in the Shining review as well. He did it a little bit in The Shining, but in The Dark Tower, he does it a lot. Like, he struggles to describe things sometimes. And it's because he's describing the same thing over and over again. So I think it was boring, sadly. Interesting in some respects, but, you know, the only reason I kept reading was because I want to finish books. I don't like leaving them unfinished. And I also knew that it's the first book in a series, and those can be weaker than others, and that's what I heard from other people. But really the main reason I kept reading it was actually for the antagonist, for the Man in Black. He was the most interesting character to me. He only appeared once, where you actually got to see his personality and how he interacted with people. It only happened once, and in a character's flashback. But even with just that, he was the most charismatic character, and I wanted to see what would happen when he and Roland finally met. The things that happened along the way weren't very interesting, and there are some events that happen with Roland and Jake that are supposed to shock you. They don't. For me, they didn't because I didn't care about them. I cared about the Man in Black. So the very end, literally the last 20 pages of the book, were the most exciting for me. So the first chapter and the last 20 pages are the only parts of the book that I really liked. The rest of it feels like filler, which is unfortunate. The next couple of things I want to mention don't actually have much to do with how I felt about the book in general. They're just things I noticed that are kind of weird. The first one is that when King introduces any female characters, and there aren't a lot of them, but when he introduces some female characters, he immediately goes to what their breasts look like. And this is something I've noticed in a lot of fantasy, actually. I've only just recently noticed it. But for some reason, two characters in Tull are described physically, and the first character I want to mention is a woman named Sylvia Pittston. Literally, the first sentence describing her physical appearance is this: breasts like earthworks. That's literally the first sentence. Breasts like earthworks. The second character that gets described in this way is this child of this really sleazy guy. Well, okay, I won't say child because that gives the wrong impression. This woman who is the daughter of a sleazy guy, she's described in some parts as pretty grungy but sexually appealing. And King writes this: her breasts thrust with overripe grandeur at the wash-faded shirt she wore. Like, I mean, like, I'm not necessarily, like, bothered by these descriptions, but at the same time, these aren't characters that actually matter. Not only that, their breasts don't matter. Their physical appearance doesn't really matter. And it's like, you don't see this with male characters. You don't have Roland described as, like, his pecs shown with the beads of sweat that glistened on them. Like, no, you don't describe male characters like that most of the time. If they are, you're usually reading a romance paperback. So it's just kind of something I noticed, and it was a little weird to read that, especially the one with Sylvia Piston. Breasts like earthworks. But, you know, it didn't break the book or anything. It's something I noticed and something I've been noticing in other fantasy, and it's unnecessary for the most part. I don't mind a little more of like sexualized description, but come on. The other thing that I noticed was that in the middle of the book, when Roland starts to think about the people that meant something to him, they come up every so often. Most of them are described or associated with a place or event in Roland's mind once, and the event is not mentioned again, but the names are, the characters are. But for some reason, Allie, or Alice, from Toll, is always mentioned with respect to Toll. I kid you not, in the span of 80 pages, the fact that Allie is from Toll comes up every 20 pages. Watch. Page 103. It was the voice of Allie, the woman he had stayed with in the town of Toll. Okay. Page 135. The sound that filled the night awoke an uneasy sensuality in him, a feeling that not even Allie, the woman he had bedded with in Toll, had been able to bring out. Okay. Page 151. Alice, the woman from Toll. And lastly, page 179. This image was followed by one of Allie, the scarred woman from Toll. Do you think we'll forget who Allie is, Mr. King? Because we didn't. What's great is that Sylvia Piston, or Pittston, who's also from Toll, is mentioned right next to Allie in one of these passages. And there's no association with her with Toll, it's only Allie. So I can't tell if this is King doing this for a purpose or oversight. This book is only 250 pages. We're not going to forget somebody 40 pages from when they last appeared. It's not going to happen. So I don't really know what King was going for when he was doing that. But he did it, and I noticed it. Again, doesn't take away from my thoughts in the book. It's just one of those things where I'm asking myself, who okayed that? Somebody said that was okay. Nobody caught that. So, final rating on the book. I would only have to give it a 5 or 6 out of 10. I'm going to go with a 6 out of 10. Even though it was a bit of a slog, it was enjoyable. And I'm not going to say the last 20 pages redeemed the book, but it certainly made me want to read on, even though I was really like this close to not picking it up. I will say this, if it weren't for Daniel Green's video, which I'll have the link in the description if you want to take a look at it, I would not have continued with this series. I would have said, no, I'm not dealing with this writing. I'm not dealing with this boring main character. I'm not dealing with this boring universe that I don't know about and can't make sense of. But I'm willing to give it a chance. So I would recommend this book to people who do like fantasy and who are fans of Stephen King and who don't mind a little more wishy-washy world building, magic system, things like that. People who are really focused on character, I actually don't know if you'll like this or not. Roland is a very different kind of protagonist, especially in the fantasy genre. And I'm looking forward to see how he progresses in this next book. I just wasn't very impressed with him in this one. If you're a fan of plot, you definitely will not like this book because there is literally no plot. It is one man moving towards another man. And a couple things happen in that time. You would probably find it a bit boring, like I did. And if you're a fan of world building, that's again another thing where I don't know if you're going to like this book or not. Really depends on how detailed you like your world to be, how much sense you want to make, how much you care about it. So I would actually highly recommend watching Green's video to see if you want to pick this book up. He has stated that it's the weakest book in the series, so I'm trying not to take it as face value for the quality of the rest of the series. And that's why I'm going to read book 2. But check his link out, and if you decide to pick it up, I would actually be really curious to see what you guys think about the book, not about the series in general, because I do want to know what you think of the book as a standalone. And if I get through the entire series, then there can be kind of a series-wide discussion of how the Gunslinger plays in with all the other books and introduces the series and sets it up, things like that. So with that said, if you pick up the book, I hope you enjoy it. Thanks for eavesdropping. I hope to catch you again next time.